I never thought I'd be here, sharing all of this with strangers. But life doesn't always go as planned, does it? It throws curveballs your way, and suddenly you're on Reddit admitting that you found yourself tangled in a ridiculously complicated situation involving your wife's best friend. Yeah, I said it. I was with Sarah. And no, it's not what you're thinking. It wasn't some impulsive fling or a moment of uncontrollable passion. No, it was intentional, calculated, and part of a much bigger disaster, one that started with my wife, Laura, and my brother, Tim. I can already imagine what you're thinking. Here comes another story about a cheating wife and a furious husband. But this isn't just about infidelity. It's about who betrayed me. My brother, Tim, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the favorite. You can't make this stuff up, and trust me, I wish I were. But to make sense of it, I need to take you back to a time when my life seemed perfect. At one point, I really believed I had everything: a beautiful wife, a steady job, and a family that seemed rock solid. Sure, we weren't rich, but my parents owned a small business that did well enough. They always hinted it would eventually pass to me and my brother. One day, you boys will take over the family business, they'd say. But the truth was, there was always this silent favoritism. Tim, the younger, more charming one, never had to fight for anything. Meanwhile, I was constantly working hard just to earn a sliver of attention or recognition. If Tim came up with some half-formed idea, my parents would praise him for being ambitious. But when I put in the effort, it was brushed aside as something they simply expected from me. It was like that my whole life. Tim got the better Christmas gifts, more freedom, fewer rules. Even when he screwed up, it was excused. Boys will be boys, my dad would say, as though that made everything okay. Then came the discussion about the family business. My parents sat me down one day, looking serious, as if what they were about to say was deeply important. "Jake," they began, "we've been thinking. Tim has a real talent for this. We're planning to pass the business on to him." Just like that. No conversation, no debate, just a decision. I remember sitting there, feeling like the floor had dropped out beneath me. Everything I'd worked for felt like it had been ripped away in an instant. They didn't even try to soften the blow. Tim was their choice, and I was just an afterthought. But I didn't say anything. What could I say? I wasn't about to make a scene. At least I had Laura, I thought. I told myself I didn't need the family business. Laura and I would build our own future, create a life together without depending on anyone else. But then Laura started changing. At first, I didn't want to see it. I convinced myself we were fine, or at least I tried to believe that. Sure, we had our occasional arguments, but what couple doesn't? Then she began acting distant, disappearing for hours and giving vague explanations, like spending time with friends or needing space. When I asked her about it, she'd get defensive, turning it around on me as if I were wrong for even questioning her. And like a fool, I let it go. I wanted to trust her, to believe that we were just going through a rough patch. But then came the lies. Small things at first, missed calls, weak excuses, nights out where she wouldn't even check in. Yet I clung to the hope that things were okay. It's twisted how love can blind you to the truth. It wasn't until I confided in Brian, my best friend since childhood, that I realized I needed real answers. His suggestion caught me off guard. "Install hidden cameras," he said. "You need to protect yourself." At first, the idea seemed crazy, but the more I thought about it, the more I wondered, what if she was cheating? What if I was too blind to see it? So I did it. I set up cameras in the house, convincing myself it was just to catch her in a small lie about spending time with friends. I wasn't ready for what I actually discovered. The first time I watched the footage, I felt like I was watching someone else's life. There she was, in our home, with Tim, my own brother. And this wasn't some fleeting, random encounter. It was passionate, intimate, and it had clearly been going on for a while. They laughed together, whispered to each other, and acted as though I didn't even exist. I can't describe how it felt in that moment. Betrayal isn't a strong enough word. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was humiliation. My wife, my brother, my home. Everything I thought I knew had been destroyed. My first instinct was to confront them, to shout, to fight Tim, to scream at Laura until my voice gave out, but I didn't do any of that. Instead, I stayed silent. I let them think they'd gotten away with it. But inside, I was seething. Watching that footage over and over again was like pouring gasoline on a fire. The anger built until it felt like it would consume me. When betrayal like that happens to you, when it's so personal, it feels like you're drowning and no one is there to save you. The worst part was realizing how easily they'd done it, using my home as their playground, sneaking around behind my back. I kept wondering how long it had been going on. Weeks? Months? The rage was suffocating. I wanted to destroy everything in sight, burn the house down, erase every memory. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. So, I waited. I let the anger simmer, planning my revenge. I couldn't act impulsively. I needed to hurt them in a way they'd never forget. That's when I thought of Sarah, Laura's best friend. They'd been inseparable since college, and if there was one person Laura trusted completely, it was her. I knew that using Sarah would cut deeper than anything else. It wasn't just about revenge on Laura. It was about making the betrayal hurt in the most personal way possible. I started small, just a few offhand comments, nothing too direct, but enough to plant the idea. I'd mention Laura casually, maybe gripe about minor things every now and then. Sarah, being sharp, noticed something was off between Laura and me before I even made a real move. But at first, she didn't press me on it. Women always seem to sense when something isn't right, don't they? Before long, I began turning up the charm. Subtle compliments, playful flirting, and light-hearted teasing. Sarah wasn't oblivious to it. She enjoyed the attention, especially since her relationship with her boyfriend had been crumbling for months. Laura was well aware of Sarah's issues with her boyfriend and frequently gave her advice, though Sarah clearly had no interest in following it. It didn't take long for Sarah to start responding to my advances. I wasn't rushing, though. I needed this to feel organic, like it was meant to happen. That's the key to revenge. It's about patience, letting things unfold naturally and on their own schedule. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop replaying the footage of Laura and Tim in my mind. The images haunted me, and I realized confronting them in private wouldn't be enough. They needed to feel the consequences publicly. I wanted the world to see them for who they truly were. It wasn't just about humiliating them. It was about stripping away everything they valued. I knew if I could release the video anonymously, it would ruin them. Tim's reputation would be destroyed. And as for Laura, well, people tend to forgive a man's mistakes faster than a woman's. I began researching how to do it, reading forums, articles, and discussions about leaving things securely without leaving a trail. It was risky, but if I played it right, they'd never trace it back to me. Maybe they'd even suspect each other. The point was, their lives would be in ruins, and I wouldn't have to lift a finger to expose myself. At the same time, I knew I needed to protect myself legally. Laura had no clue what was coming, which gave me the upper hand. I reached out to a lawyer, careful not to reveal too much. I explained that I was thinking about filing for divorce and wanted to safeguard my assets. When I mentioned I suspected infidelity, the lawyer didn't seem surprised. It was clear he'd heard this story many times before. "I want to freeze our accounts," I said. "I don't want her touching a single cent once this starts." The lawyer raised an eyebrow but didn't push back. "We can do that, but it'll take time. You'll need proof of the affair. Hearsay won't be enough." "Oh, I've got plenty of that," I replied. "I'll get you what you need." We discussed the steps to secure my finances and ensure Laura couldn't access our shared savings. The lawyer knew exactly how to handle it, and I felt confident. The hardest part was keeping all of this bottled up. I had to act like everything was normal, pretend that I wasn't already miles ahead of her in this game. But every time I looked at her, I felt sick. She'd smile at me as if nothing had changed, as if she wasn't sneaking around with my brother, and I'd smile back, all the while plotting her downfall. Meanwhile, Sarah was becoming more receptive. I'd catch her glancing at me when Laura wasn't paying attention. It was only a matter of time before I made my move. But I wasn't just planning to sleep with Sarah to get back at Laura. This needed to be bigger. Laura had to feel the sting of betrayal as deeply as I had. It was all coming together, the pieces falling perfectly into place. I could see the fallout on the horizon, and it was going to be spectacular. The first rule of revenge is patience. You set the stage, make your target feel secure, like nothing's amiss. You have to make them believe they're in control, that it's all their idea. That's exactly the approach I took with Laura. I couldn't just storm in, accusing her of sleeping with Tim. She'd either deny it or, worse, become defensive and shut me out completely. No, I needed a more strategic approach. One evening, after dinner, I decided to plant the idea. We were sitting on the couch, and I acted distant, like something was weighing on my mind. Laura, being Laura, didn't notice at first. She was busy on her phone, probably messaging Tim or Sarah. But I knew I had to make her pay attention. "I've been thinking," I said, leaning back and keeping my tone calm, "about us, about relationships in general." She glanced up from her phone, mildly curious but not overly concerned. "What do you mean?" I paused, pretending to search for the right words. "You know, marriage is complicated. People change, and so do their needs. I've been reading about how some couples keep things interesting by being more open." Her reaction was immediate. Her confusion and suspicion were plain on her face. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "An open marriage," I said, shrugging nonchalantly. "Not exactly that, but something along those lines. People have different ways of keeping things fresh. I just thought it might be worth discussing." She laughed. But it wasn't her usual laugh. It was awkward, uneasy, like she didn't know how to react. "Are you serious right now?" For a moment, her eyes narrowed, and I thought she might challenge me, but I stayed calm, giving her enough space to process. It was the perfect setup, enough to make her wonder if I was exploring other options, but not enough to reveal that I already knew about her affair with Tim. "I don't know, Jake," she said, shaking her head. "That sounds crazy. I've never thought about anything like that." Exactly what I'd been waiting for. "I get it," I said, easing back. "It's not for everyone, but hey, we're adults, right? We should be able to talk about these things without overreacting, just a conversation." And that was it. I didn't push her further that night. I knew the seed had been planted. It would start to gnaw at her, growing in the back of her mind. Since she was already crossing the line in our marriage, the idea of something unconventional, like an open relationship, wasn't entirely foreign to her. What I needed to do now was convince her that I was completely on board with it. I had to make Laura believe that I was fine with the idea, like I was cracking a door open and leaving it up to her to walk through. It didn't take long for her to bring it up again. Just a few days later, she casually mentioned Sarah, almost out of the blue. "I was talking to Sarah earlier," she said. "You know, about that thing you mentioned." I played dumb, pretending I had no clue what she was referring to. "What thing?" I asked, even though I already knew exactly where this was heading. "The open relationship idea," Laura said. She seemed hesitant but curious. She seemed kind of interested. Apparently a lot of couples are trying it these days. I felt a slight smirk forming, but kept it hidden. I knew Laura wouldn't resist confiding in Sarah about it, and Sarah, well, she was already falling into my trap, even if she didn't realize it yet. "Oh, really?" I replied, feigning surprise. "What did she think about it?" Laura shrugged, but I could tell she was intrigued. She wasn't freaked out by it at all. I mean, I don't know. Some couples do it and it works for them. I let out a small laugh. Guess people are more open-minded than we thought. That was it. The moment everything fell into place. Laura didn't even realize that by bringing Sarah into the conversation, she was giving me exactly what I needed. Now Sarah was officially part of this, even if she didn't fully understand her role in my plan yet. Over the next few weeks, I began escalating things with Sarah. I started texting her more often, slipping in compliments here and there, adding a bit of playful teasing when Laura wasn't around. It didn't take long for Sarah to respond. She was desperate for attention, especially with her own relationship crumbling. As Sarah grew closer to me, Laura remained completely unaware. Sarah and I started meeting up for coffee under the guise of catching up or talking about her problems. Laura trusted Sarah completely and didn't think twice about it. She assumed Sarah was loyal to her, but she had no idea how easily I was fueling the fire. Eventually, I brought up the open relationship idea with Sarah. I made it seem like Laura was fully on board, even though that wasn't true yet. One evening, when it was just the two of us, I casually said, Laura and I have been discussing trying new things, being more open with each other. It feels like something worth exploring. I watched Sarah's reaction closely, gauging her interest. She raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Oh, really?" she asked. "Yeah," I replied, acting casual. "It's all new to us, but I think it's something we might try. Laura seems fine with it, and I think it could be interesting." That was all Sarah needed to hear. It was the green light she'd been waiting for. From then on, things between us started heating up. We kept it subtle, flirting, a few lingering touches, but the tension was undeniable. It built steadily with each encounter. Meanwhile, Laura had no clue what was happening. She didn't realize I was carefully orchestrating everything, using Sarah as part of my revenge. Finally, the moment came. After weeks of preparation, I crossed the line with Sarah. It happened on a Saturday night while Laura was out, probably with Tim, pretending to be with friends or whatever excuse she had come up with. I didn't care. I had my own plans. Sarah came over, supposedly just for a drink, but we both knew what was about to happen. The moment she walked in, the air was charged with tension. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. It was only a matter of time before one of us made the first move. When I finally made a move, it felt like everything had come full circle. She leaned in, meeting me halfway, her lips parting slightly. That was all the encouragement I needed. That was all the encouragement I needed. I kissed her deeply, pushing her back onto the couch, my hands exploring her body. She gave in completely, not resisting for a second. But the truth was, it was never about Sarah. It was never really about her at all. Every touch, every kiss was part of a larger plan. This was about power, about taking control. It was about ensuring that Laura never saw this coming. I was taking something that belonged to her right there in our living room without hesitation. When it was over, Sarah lay next to me, catching her breath. I felt a surge of triumph. I didn't even care about Sarah anymore. My mind was already focused on Laura and how this would destroy her. The thought of her finding out that her best friend and I had just been together behind her back was perfect. The best part? Laura had practically handed me the green light when she entertained the open relationship idea. She thought she was the one in control, but I had been 3 steps ahead of her the whole time. As Sarah slept, my mind was already racing ahead to the next phase of my plan. I still had the footage of Laura and Tim, the one I'd been holding onto for weeks. The video of them together in our bed was like a ticking time bomb, and I knew it was almost time to set it off. I had done my research, learned how to leak the video anonymously, ensuring it couldn't be traced back to me. It was surprisingly easy. People post things online every day without getting caught, and I wasn't going to make any mistakes. I uploaded the video to several key websites, posting it in places where it would spread quickly. No names, no identifying details, just raw footage of them acting like they didn't have a care in the world. When I hit submit for the last time, I leaned back in my chair staring at the screen. My heart was racing. I wasn't sure what I expected to feel. Maybe satisfaction, maybe relief. But instead, it was a strange mix of anger and anticipation. It felt like waiting for a storm to hit. I knew that once the video started circulating, there would be no turning back. Tim and Laura's reputations would be obliterated. And that's exactly what I wanted. The next few days passed in a haze as I obsessively checked the websites to see the video gaining traction. Comments flooded in, filled with venom, calling Laura and Tim cheaters, liars, and worse. Nobody even knew their real names, but it didn't matter. The footage spoke volumes, and the world was taking notice. At home, things began to shift. Laura wasn't oblivious. She sensed the growing distance between us. I no longer cared about the things that used to bother me, like when she went out for hours. She noticed the change and became uneasy. Her nervousness showed in her eyes as she struggled to figure out what had changed. One evening during dinner, she finally brought it up. "You've been acting weird lately," she said cautiously. "Is something wrong?" I gave her a casual smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Just busy with work," I replied. "Why, is something wrong with you?" She blinked in confusion, her brow furrowing. "No, I don't know. You seem different." I shrugged nonchalantly. Maybe I'm just seeing things differently. That answer unsettled her, but she didn't press further. She was too preoccupied with keeping her own secrets hidden, too scared that I might uncover the truth about her affair with Tim. Little did she know, I already knew everything. I was just biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash the storm. And Sarah? She was blissfully unaware of the bigger picture. She thought our connection was an exhilarating, forbidden affair. She had no clue she was merely a pawn in my plan for revenge. Every piece was falling into place, and the best part was that none of them suspected a thing. It was finally time. I'd waited long enough. The video had already done significant damage, and the tension in the house was unbearable. Laura had no idea what was about to hit her, and that's exactly how I wanted it. For weeks, I had played the role of the aloof, distracted husband, the man too consumed by work to notice her deceit. She never saw it coming. After dinner that night, I decided it was time to destroy her world. I sat her down, and the atmosphere shifted immediately. She could tell something was wrong, but tried to keep the mood light, hoping to smooth things over. That ship, however, had sailed long ago. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. She put her fork down, concern creasing her brow. "What's going on?" Leaning back, I crossed my arms and delivered the bombshell. "I want a divorce." The words hit her like a grenade. Her face twisted in shock and confusion as she blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing as if struggling to form words. "What?" she finally stammered, her voice unsteady. "Where is this coming from, Jake? What are you talking about?" It was almost laughable how clueless she sounded. "Where is this coming from?" I echoed, my voice dripping with incredulity. As if she hadn't been sneaking around with my brother for who knows how long. As if she hadn't lied to me every single day. "I'm done, Laura," I said firmly. "This marriage is over." She shook her head in disbelief, panic creeping into her eyes. No, this doesn't make any sense. We can talk about this, Jake. What's wrong? Why are you saying this? We've had rough patches, but we can fix this, right?" I met her desperate gaze with a steady one. "There's nothing to fix," I said coldly. "I've already spoken to a lawyer." Her face went pale. "A lawyer? What the hell, Jake? Why did you talk to me first?" "Because there's nothing to discuss," I replied, my tone icy. "You're not getting another chance to fix this." I could see the desperation rising in her as she scrambled to make sense of the situation. She tried to speak, to explain, but I cut her off before she could spin more lies. "No," I said sharply. "This isn't going to be some drawn-out argument where you pretend to care. I'm in control now. I've already cut you off from all our accounts." Her eyes widened in shock. "You did what?" she gasped. "You're not getting a single penny," I said, letting the weight of my words sink in. "No credit cards, no savings, everything is frozen. You're on your own." Her expression twisted into a mix of fear and anger as she processed what I'd just said. "You can't just freeze the accounts. What am I supposed to do? I need access to our money." I shrugged, watching her panic with cold detachment. "That's your problem now. You've got nothing, no access to any of it." The realization hit her like a freight train. She looked at me as if I were a stranger, someone she didn't recognize, but I'd always been this person. She just hadn't bothered to notice. "Jake, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "This doesn't make any sense. We can fix this. Just talk to me. Let me—" I cut her off, leaning forward and locking eyes with her. "You still don't get it, do you?" I said, my tone laced with venom. "This isn't just about a rough patch, Laura." "I know." Her face went ashen. "You know what?" she whispered. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "I know about you and Tim," I said, my voice sharp and cold. "I've known for weeks. Don't even try to deny it." Her mouth dropped open, her eyes wide with horror and disbelief. No, Jake, it's not what you think." "Oh, it's exactly what I think," I snapped. "I've seen the footage." She froze, the blood draining from her face. "What footage?" "The footage of you and Tim in our home," I said, watching her squirm. "You didn't think I'd find out, did you? But I did, and I've been watching you for weeks. I know everything, Laura." She stared at me, utterly stunned. Her face contorted in terror as she realized she was trapped. "Jake," she stammered, tears streaming down her face. "Save it," I said, cutting her off. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I've already filed for divorce, and I've made sure you won't get a dime." She tried to speak again, but no words came out. She was defeated, broken. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of pity for her, but it vanished as quickly as it came. I remembered the lies, the betrayal, and any trace of sympathy disappeared. "And just so you know," I added, leaning back in my chair, "I wasn't sitting around waiting for this to blow up in my face. I took matters into my own hands." Her tear-filled eyes locked onto mine, confusion and fear mingling on her face. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. I let the silence stretch, savoring the tension before delivering the final blow. "I slept with Sarah." Her face twisted in shock and disbelief. "What?" "You heard me," I said, satisfaction dripping from my voice. "Your best friend. I've been with her, and guess what? She thinks it's fine because you told her you were cool with open relationships." Her hand flew to her mouth as the weight of my words sank in. Her world was crumbling around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "You're a monster," she whispered, her voice trembling with pain. I smiled, feeling the balance of power fully tilt in my favor. Maybe, but you made me this way. Laura broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, completely shattered. There was nothing left for her to say. The truth was out, her betrayal exposed, her finances frozen, and everything she'd taken for granted was gone. There was no recovery from this. The divorce progressed faster than I had anticipated. Once the footage went public, Laura didn't have the energy to fight back. Her reputation was dragged through the dirt, and by the time the final papers were signed, she was just a shadow of her former self. Tim tried to stay out of the fallout, but it didn't matter. His life was crumbling too. He lost his job, was excluded from family events, and our parents finally recognized him for the spoiled, selfish person he truly was. They cut him off completely. As for Laura, she was a wreck. The few times we encountered each other in court, she looked drained, exhausted, and utterly broken. Good. I didn't feel even a twinge of guilt. She brought it on herself. When the divorce was finalized, I got exactly what I wanted, thanks to the lawyer I'd hired, full control of our shared assets, the house, and the car. Laura walked away with practically nothing, and she knew she'd never see another dime from me again. But after everything was over, I found myself standing alone in the house we'd once shared, the place where we had planned a future together. It didn't feel like a victory. Instead, it felt like the end of something. Sure, I had won. I'd taken everything from her, but the satisfaction I had envisioned wasn't there. As I stood in the empty, silent rooms, I realized something. Revenge had consumed me. It had driven every choice, every action, and now that it was done, I didn't know what came next. There was no triumph, no sense of closure, just emptiness. Laura was gone, the divorce was complete, and I was finally free. But now what? I didn't have an answer. For a while, I threw myself into work, immersing myself in projects and focusing on my career. Without the distractions of my marriage, I found I had more time and energy to dedicate to my job. It felt good, like I was reclaiming control over my life. My boss noticed my renewed focus and began giving me more responsibilities. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was accomplishing something for myself. Not for Laura, not for us, but just for me. As for Sarah, things between us didn't last. After the dust settled, we kept in touch for a while. She'd text occasionally to check in, and we'd meet up now and then, but the thrill, the excitement of our affair had started to fade. It had been fun, sure, but that's all it ever was. I wasn't in love with Sarah. She was just another piece of my plan. Eventually, the messages became less frequent until they stopped altogether. She moved on and found someone new. I didn't care. I didn't need her anymore, and I certainly didn't want to drag her into the emotional mess I was left with. Once the divorce was finalized, I had a lot of time to think about what came next. Starting over sounded simple in theory, but it wasn't. I had spent so many years with Laura, and no matter how much I hated her for what she'd done, it left its mark. You can't walk away from that kind of betrayal without scars. But I knew I couldn't stay stuck in the past forever. The more I reflected, the more I realized how much anger and resentment I'd been carrying. Revenge had been my driving force, but now that it was behind me, it was time to let go and move forward. I started going out more, meeting new people, and forming connections that weren't tied to my old life. At first, it felt strange, like I was relearning how to be myself. But over time, I began to find my footing. I made new friends, had new experiences, and even started dating again. I took it slow. No drama, no betrayals. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just enjoying life for the first time in years, without the weight of my marriage holding me back. The last interaction I had with Laura was through our lawyers. By the time everything was finalized, there wasn't anything left to say. During our final court session, she didn't even look at me, and honestly, I was fine with that. No apology could undo what she'd done. No words could erase the damage. It was better this way. As I walked out of the courtroom, I realized something important. I didn't hate her anymore. In fact, I didn't feel anything at all. She was just someone I used to know, someone who had hurt me deeply but no longer had any power over me, and that was the real victory. The last time I saw Tim was at our parents' house. They had invited me over to discuss the family business, hoping to mend things after everything that had happened. Tim wasn't there. They had cut him off completely. I didn't care. He'd made his choices and I'd made mine. We were done. Walking away from that part of my life felt like shedding an old skin. The revenge, the anger, it had served its purpose. But now it was time for something better, something new. I didn't need to look back anymore. I had everything I needed: freedom, control, and a future that was finally mine to shape.